Hey guys, it's Doug again from Fellowship of the Martyrs, Liberty Disaster Relief. I've got a question that came up recently. I did a video that stating that all churches are 501c3s. There are people who are freaked out about the institutional church selling its soul to the government and becoming a 501c3 corporation. Well, what they don't understand, and I talked to the premier nonprofit lawyer in the country who happens to be here in Kansas City and gave us some time to go talk to him one time. And I said, we want to structure this so that we can receive donations or whatever without being a 501c3 church. He said, are you a church? I said, yeah. He said, you're already a 501c3. I said, no, we're not. We haven't applied. We're not a corporation. We're specifically trying to avoid that. He says, it doesn't matter. You're already a 501c3. I said, what do you mean? He said, that is the section of the IRS code that refers to churches and charities and religious organizations. So whether you say I'm a church or whether you say I'm a corporation requesting permission to be a church, you're still subject to section 501c3 of the IRS code, because that is where all those organizations that fit in that category are funded, just like educational institutions fit under other things. Anyway, so people call me and say, are you a 501c3? And I'm like, sure, everybody is. Every church is. Even if it's whatever. If you say I'm a church and you meet 8 of the 14 basic guidelines of what they define as a church, which are all real easy. I mean, we meet like 13 of 14, and we'd meet all of them if we had Sunday school. And without any effort, okay, anyway, let me try this again. Okay, all that's in the other video. But somebody commented on that video saying, what is it exactly that you're limited to be able to do if you're a registered 501c3 corporation? Okay, well, the thing is, there's no difference whether you're an unregistered church like we are, because the IRS says if you say I'm a church, you are automatically exempt from sales tax and from and you can give tax receipts and stuff like that. Exempt from income tax on revenue that comes into the organization. So I'm going to read you from publication 1828 of the IRS code. I'll put a link in here too where you can go read it online. But let me establish for you, first of all, what it says here on page 3. Automatic exemption for churches. Churches that meet the requirements of IRS section 501c3 are automatically considered a tax exempt and are not required to apply for or obtain recognition of tax-exempt status from the IRS. That's the category we're in with lots of other congregations around the country. Although there is no requirement to do so, many churches seek recognition of tax-exempt status from the IRS because such recognition assures church leaders, members, and contributors that the church is recognized as exempt and qualifies for related tax benefits. For example, contributors to a church that has been recognized as tax-exempt would know for sure that their contributions generally are tax deductible. Okay, so how that applies to us, for example. Right now, we're in conversation with Walmart about getting some of their leftovers. And so the manager was all excited because we can be there every day, we can pick up stuff, and we could get leftover plants and flowers that were going to die that we could maybe nurse back to life, plus bread and other stuff they were going to throw away because the big food bank in town only comes 2 days a week and it doesn't last long enough. And we're right here. So we go in there, they say, give us your tax ID number. So I give them the tax ID number, which is a free, it's just the social security number of the organization or the registration number. And the little scanner that they scan out the stuff with accesses the IRS website, looks for registered organizations, doesn't find us on the list and says, nope, we're not giving it to them. And I say, but you've given us, grants before, like $10,000 over the years for a food pantry. Walmart gives like $1 billion to food relief organizations a year or some such. Anyway, that churches don't have to be registered and it might not be on the list. And they're like, yeah, I know, but the little scanner says we can't because it chokes when we try to scan it. So we're just going to write it off as trash and just give it to you. We won't get the donation. So we're trying to go around with headquarters down in Arkansas to figure out how do you get around this, because it should be smarter than that. But basically, if you're a corporation that has said, okay, we want to be registered with the IRS so that they know we're a nonprofit, so that donors know that we're a nonprofit, so that they can be sure that they're going to get their tax credit, then you show them why you meet all these qualifications. They are convinced, and they put you on the list. We are unregistered. So even though we meet those qualifications, we don't feel an obligation to prove to somebody that we meet those qualifications. The downside is somebody that wants proof that we meet those qualifications has to take our word for it because the IRS isn't endorsing it. Of course, the IRS had to take our word for it and probably didn't do anything to verify what we told them anyway. So anyway, it's sort of circular. And of course, none of this applies to anybody outside the country who doesn't benefit from any American tax credit anyway, or discount off sales tax or income tax or whatever. Anyway, the point of the video, I'm sorry I'm getting to it so late, is that people call me all the time and they flat refuse to walk in the door of any Babylonian sellout 501c3 corporation church and will never participate, will never give them money, will never have anything to do with them. And I think it's a religious spirit. And when they come here and say, are you one? And I say, no, we're not a registered 501c3. Oh, great. They always flip out on something else. They always find something to be divisive about because they are looking for reasons to divide, not to be one. Okay? And they have been built up into this froth of anger about 501c3 without good information. And that is ignorance and doubly irritating. But besides the intransigence, digging their heels in and being stubborn and having a religious spirit, they're also ignorant. And between the two of them, there's just no point. Don't call me. Don't come here. Don't try to be a part of what we're doing here if you are going to be that divisive. It's just not going to work. We are going to have to see past differences of opinion on things. And whether you are 501c3 is not salvific. It is not a salvation issue. It's not even anywhere close. Okay, let me explain to you. You are flipped out by whoever you've been watching about the sellout Babylonian 501c3 church. Because the IRS has them under their thumb and is dictating what they can say and probably faxes the sermons to the preacher every Sunday or whatever, which is all a crock of crap, which is all made up nonsense. Okay. So you find some little Bible Baptist whatever group that is still, even if they are unregistered, is still subject to Section 501c3 of the IRS code. And even if they are giving tax benefits by the nature of them being unregistered and automatically tax exempt, they can still lose that if they do certain things that Section 501c3 says they should not do. Okay, I we here are subject to the same rules that the big corporate church down the road is subject to as it relates to politics and campaigning for specific candidates or substantially involving ourselves in political campaigns. And that is really the only exemption, the only control there. Okay. And there's a lot of generosity. I'm going to read you an article that came out just a couple days ago that kind of spurred a lot of this. Because there are pastors all over that think it's totally wrong that the IRS should try to involve itself at all in the free speech of pastors. And the IRS is actively not involving itself in the free speech of pastors to the point where the pastors are daring them to. I'll read that in a minute. The point is, in publication 1828, it lays out real clearly what will get you in trouble, what will jeopardize your tax-exempt status. One of them is inurement to the private benefit of leadership. That means the net assets of the organization are all going to one family or one guy and way out of proportion benefiting a particular person or whatever. Now, that doesn't mean that the pastor isn't paid. That doesn't mean that employees aren't paid or there's not compensation for reasonable whatever. But if you're a $10 million organization and $9 million is going to the one guy, something's really, really wrong. And they're going to decide that you're not, that violates your tax-exempt status. The other one is substantial lobbying activity or political campaign activity or lobbying for a particular candidate. And then it goes through a whole bunch of examples of what is and isn't. For example, if you invite both candidates for a mayor or Senate or Congress race, and on one Sunday this one comes to speak, and on this Sunday the next one comes to speak, and you don't endorse one or the other, you just give them a platform to inform the people of what they stand for, you're fine. If you invite one and not the others, and you say, this is my man, and you're the pastor, and from the pulpit you say, this is my guy, everybody should vote for him, if you do it substantially, there's a problem. If it was a one-time thing, probably nothing's going to happen at all. Now, if you speak on... Now, people think that anything that's controversial, abortion, death penalty, Obamacare, anything that's controversial, that the church can't speak on that without the IRS whacking them. It's just not true. It's just not true at all. That's not the way it works. That's not what's happening out there. Period. The one big blowout that I can find is the Indianapolis Baptist Temple back about 10 years ago. 15 years ago maybe now. And that all had to do with the way they were paying their employees and trying to switch from being a corporation to an unregistered church. And it all had to do with FICA and how they were paying their employees and everything, and the IRS seized their church. It had nothing to do with speech. It had nothing to do with politics or whatever. Anyway, and it was all screwed up. But let me read you an article that just came out. This is from Politico Pro. I'll put the link to the story here. This came out 11/3, 2 days ago, by Rachel Bade. It says a record number of rogue Christian pastors are endorsing candidates from the pulpit. Oh, the title is Rogue Pastors Endorse Candidates, but IRS Looks Away. A record number of rogue Christian pastors are endorsing candidates from the pulpit this election cycle, using Sunday sermons to defiantly flout tax rules. Their message to the IRS, sue me. But the tax agency is doing anything but. Although the IRS has sued itself for not enforcing the law and admitting about 100 churches may be breaking the rules, The pastors and their critics alike say the agency is looking the other way. The agency refuses to say if it is acting. At the same time, the number of pastors endorsing candidates in what they call Pulpit Freedom Sunday jumped from 33 people in 2008 to more than 1,600 this year. According to organizers, Alliance Defending Freedom, and this year they've stepped up their drive, telling pastors to back candidates any Sunday up until the election, not just one Sunday as in past years. The church leaders are jumping in high-profile races that will help decide the Senate and tight governor races across the country, endorsing candidates from Tom Tillis over Senator Kay Hagan, Democrat in North Carolina, to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican, over Allison Lundergan Grimes, Democrat in Kentucky. Reverend Mark Cowart, pastor of Colorado Springs-based Church for All Nations, suggested good Christians should vote Democratic Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper out of office in an October 19th sermon, where he endorsed his GOP rival, Bob Beauprez. Beauprez is, quote, Beauprez is against more gun control, does not support abortion, and he does not protect the man-woman marriage. That's the one I'm voting for. I'm endorsing biblical principles, the preacher said in a video of the service, pacing a church stage and chopping his hand through the air for emphasis. At issue is the church's tax break as tax-exempt 501c3 organizations. They don't pay taxes, and donations to them can be deducted from contributors' taxable income. But with that break comes limits on political endorsements. Charities are barred from engaging in political campaigns. So while pastors, and it's not just churches either, any charity is not supposed to be engaged, whether it's a flower club or a educational institution or whatever, they're not supposed to be actively engaged in political campaigns. So while pastors can discuss abortion, gay marriage, and other controversial issues in their sermons, they're not allowed to back candidates or use church money to fund campaign activities and keep their tax break. You can't have, quote, you can't have a tax-exempt entity engaged in politics because that involves using tax-exempt money for political purposes, so it's an unfair playing field, end quote, said Annie Laurie Gaylor, co-founder of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the organization that sued the IRS in 2012 for failing to enforce electioneering restrictions on churches. The group settled this summer with an understanding that the IRS would eventually take action. So far, there has been no evidence that they have. IRS Commissioner John Koskinen, in an interview last month with tax analysts, suggested the IRS isn't planning to crack down on churches anytime soon. He said the FFRF lawsuit news spread out into the world. Somehow we are doing something very different, and we are going to show up either more aggressively or more often in a different way than we have in the past, and that is not what that case was all about, end quote. It's another sign of the tax agency turned upside down by the Tea Party targeting controversy. Although the IRS is under fire from the right for being heavy-handed with conservative tax-exempt entities, it is also getting hit from the left for failing to enforce decade-old rules governing churches and politics. The law was written in 1954 by then-Senator Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat of Texas, who was facing a contentious re-election challenge where several 501c3s endorsed his opponent, labeling him soft on communism. The pastors, who make it easy for the IRS by often taping their sermons and mailing them to the tax agency, argue that it infringes on their First Amendment rights. The church is God's organization. What right does the government have to control this? Said Reverend Kevin Baird of Legacy Church in Charleston, South Carolina. In a recent sermon, Baird questioned the integrity of a local state Senate Republican official up for re-election who calls himself pro-life, yet has not advanced legislation on the issue in his committee. In Charlotte, North Carolina, Southern Baptist preacher Mark Harris, who made his own failed bid for Senator Hagan's seat in the GOP primary earlier this year, said he made clear to his congregation that he backed Tillis, decrying Hagan's pro-choice and gay marriage stances as deeds of darkness during an October service. In Georgia, a week later, Reverend Jeff Whitmire used his sermon to back Georgia Governor Nathan Deal, Republican, and Senate candidate David Perdue, Republican, over their Democratic counterparts Jason Carter and Michelle Nunn, he said. And Cowart in Colorado also endorsed Representative Cory Gardner, Republican over incumbent Senator Mark Udall, Democrat, saying we need to see him out. Their ultimate goal, igniting a lawsuit with the IRS and taking the issue to the Supreme Court. Quote, if by chance a member of the IRS gets this sermon and is listening, sue me, end quote, said evangelical pastor Jim Garlow of the San Diego-based Skyline Church after backing Democratic Representative Scott Peters for re-election. His Republican challenger, Carl DeMaio, is gay and could advance a, quote, radical homosexual agenda, end quote, Garlow warned. Okay. In the IRS publication, it talks about specific things you can and can't do and what. Now, all of the things these guys are doing violate that. Now, it may or may not be substantial part of the organization's activities when it's just him talking in a sermon and they're not really spending large amounts of volunteer time, staff time, or money involving themselves in politics. And local little 200-person church where the pastor expressed an opinion is never going to get the IRS's attention. Because it's not really going to be a factor, most likely, in that election. I don't know how it got so bad, except that it's just part and parcel of the division that we are dealing with in the bride. But this total over-the-top demonizing of any organization that decided for whatever reason to be a 501c3 corporation is over the top. It is just obnoxious, and it is a religious spirit. It's not based on fact. It doesn't. If you find, like us, an unregistered church, they're still subject to the same not electioneering, not campaigning, not whatever rules that Lyndon Johnson put in 1954. If you don't like them, then violate them, sue the IRS, take it to the Supreme Court, and get it kicked out of the IRS code. That's what they're trying to do. And as you can see, the IRS isn't enforcing it on anybody. I have never once been contacted by any government agency and said, stop saying what you're saying. And whatever I have to say, the only restriction in the Section 501c3 is against political speech and using the organization to endorse specific candidates. If I was to go to some candidate's news conference and say, I, Doug Perry, I think you ought to vote for this guy. I haven't used any church resources. I haven't identified myself as on behalf of the Church of Liberty or Fellowship of the Martyrs. This is the guy you should vote for. I'm just expressing my personal opinion. That's perfectly okay. And even so, even in the IRS 501c3, it says substantial. It has to be substantial. The Democrats have been violating this forever. I mean, forever. Obama spoke in I don't know how many big churches where the pastor swooned and never invited any other candidate and made it clear this is our guy and threw their whole machinery behind him. And the IRS always looks the other way. Now, these are mostly Republican guys, again, that I don't think probably should even be Republican. But, I mean, anyway, guys that are wanting to run for office, guys that have political aspirations, guys that think somehow the political scene is going to save us, whatever. Anyway, I'm calling for you to back off of your whole hatred for a small local church that decided to be set up as a corporation because their tax attorney or their accountant or somebody said you need corporate protections because if somebody slips and falls in the hallway, they're going to sue the board personally. And this doctor, this lawyer, this business guy that sits on your board is risking his personal assets when somebody falls down the stairs and sues for $2 million, and your insurance only covers $1 million. They're going to come after the personal assets of everybody that sits on the board. And you're going to lose your house, you're going to lose your business, whatever, because of a stupid slip and fall in the church. But if you're a corporation, then they sue the corporation. You liquidate the assets of the corporation. They can't come after the board members. Okay, I think it's sort of chicken to not have Jesus be your insurance. And I'd like to see a little more backbone. But they didn't sell out to Babylon and the IRS because they decide as business guys that a business structure makes some sense to them. And even if they decide that they want to register with the IRS so that donors will know for sure that this is an organization that has met the criteria and already been looked at by the IRS. See, if somebody that gave us money that was in the United States got audited and the IRS said, we don't know Church of Liberty, we don't think this is an approved deduction, maybe they give $10,000, okay? So they're going to get a, whatever it might be, $1,000 tax break, depending on their income category, percentage that they're paying. So the IRS says, we're going to disallow this $1,000 tax credit because we don't know Church of Liberty. They would have to then send me a letter, investigate whether we meet 8 of the 14 criteria. We would respond back and say, here's the church bulletins, here's responses to all this stuff, how we ordain ministers, what sacred text we use, all the list. And the IRS would say, okay, it's fine, never mind, you can have your $1,000 tax credit. It's never come up, okay? But a donor giving to us needs to understand that that might happen. And that the IRS might say, we don't know them, they're not on the list. Then they would investigate us. We would show them that we are a legit organization. And they would say, okay, never mind, you can have your tax credit. Now, for somebody's accountant will say, no, don't give to Doug. That's more headache for me because I can't be sure that that's for sure tax deductible. Give it to that big organization, corporation, First Baptist Church over there that has the paperwork already in line, because then we can be sure that it's going to work that way. We have had several grants, several organizations that will not grant us money if we are not registered. So it has had a real cost to us. There's one group here in Liberty that there's only a dozen nonprofits, and you can only win the award. It's like $60,000, and we should be eligible. They've asked us to apply for it, but then I tell them we're not a registered 501c3. Well, that's required. But it's not required by the IRS. Well, it's required for our grant. Okay, well then we can't. There's nothing we can do. No matter what good of work we're doing in Liberty, no matter how much we're helping, feeding, caring for, whatever, you can't give us that money because your grant thing says you have to be dotted, crossed, T'd, figured out, settled the way the IRS would like it to be. Not this loophole automatic exemption that churches get no matter what. Anyway, there's all kinds of reasons why a little local congregation with a pastor that got out of seminary is doing the best he can, inherited something he had no say over, and they've been an IRS 501c3 registered corporation for, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And then there's going to be people that say he's a whore, he's a sellout, he's letting FEMA tell him what to preach, he's whatever. And I'm telling you, it's prejudiced, it's wrong, it's mean, and it's not the heart of Jesus. And you go find one that's unregistered, they're going to be subject to the exact same IRS code. You find one that doesn't give tax deductions, that's just We don't have a bank account. We don't have nothing. We don't need the money. We don't. If you want to give the money, you're not getting a tax credit. We're just us. Okay, that's fine. I'm still going to say the same stuff they say. I'm not going to be slowed down by the IRS. And if the IRS said, hey, you can't talk about this, or this without losing your tax exemption, I don't care. I really don't. It's maybe, of the people that send money, maybe 5, 6 a year ask for a tax receipt out of hundreds. Where it would affect us is with the grocery stores more than anything. But, somebody else will start to run a food pantry, whatever. It's just, and this only applies to churches, by the way. If you're a religious organization, like a Christian school, you're not automatically exempt. That's only for churches. So if I was like a homeless ministry, but not specifically a church, then you have to be a registered 501c3 organization. Only if you're a church, you have the option to be unregistered. Or if you do less than $5,000 a year, there's various organizations like a youth baseball league that's a unregistered nonprofit association that has less than $5,000 a year revenue. The IRS is like, don't even bother us. Don't, just go be charitable, work with the little inner city basketball league, whatever. Sell some candy bars, pay for your uniforms, leave us out of it if it's less than $5,000. Anyway, I hope this answers some questions. The reality is that a lot of the fear that people have about how the IRS is controlling churches is just bogus. The IRS isn't doing that. Is specifically avoiding doing that, and pastors are daring it to do that so that they can sue them, take them to the Supreme Court, and get all of that wording out of Section 501c3. Or at least settle it one way or the other. But I don't see any evidence that the IRS is actively controlling churches anywhere. Anyway, so I hope for some people this moderates your position and lets you settle down a little bit. There are very sweet pastors doing really good work in organizations that are registered 501c3 organizations that maybe you've dismissed entirely because of the way the organization is structured or the kind of bank account they have or whether they have a tax ID number or whatever. And I don't think that's fair. I just don't think that's fair on a whole number of levels. I don't think that's fair, especially if it's based on misinformation and ignorance. Anyway, that's all for now. In the name of Jesus, amen. Thanks for listening.